In the year 2387, the Arconian Empire stood as a testament to humanity's boundless ambition and mastery over genetics. Stretching across 7 star systems, the Empire had built its reputation on military might and biological weaponry that could neutralize any threat with surgical precision. The Empire's crown jewel was the Chimera Project, an initiative designed to engineer the ultimate apex predator, a creature so lethal and intelligent that mere rumors of its deployment would quell resistance on frontier worlds. Standing before a wall of holographic displays in the sterile white laboratory of the Imperial Research Division, Dr. Solara Morin adjusted her spectacles and watched with satisfaction as the vitals of her creation stabilized. Her slender fingers tapped against the cool glass surface, scrolling through complex genetic algorithms that represented years of dedicated research. Vital signs optimal. Neural pathways fully developed. Leviathan is ready, Colonel, she announced, her voice carrying a hint of pride that scientists rarely attempted to conceal when presenting their masterpieces. Colonel Roderick Varn, commander of the Arconian Special Operations Division, stepped forward. His polished boots reflected the harsh laboratory lights as he approached the massive containment chamber. Within the translucent walls of reinforced plexiglass, suspended in a nutrient-rich solution, floated what appeared to be a 3-meter-tall nightmare given flesh. Leviathan, the Empire's newest instrument of persuasion. Magnificent, Varn murmured, his scarred face illuminated by the blue glow of the chamber. And you're certain it will obey without question? No rebellious tendencies or moral hesitations? Dr. Morin's lips curled into a thin smile. Colonel, Leviathan has been engineered with a singular purpose: to eliminate designated targets with maximum efficiency. We've removed all emotional responses except those that enhance hunting abilities. Fear, compassion, doubt. These are alien concepts to our creation. The creature in the tank shifted slightly, its metallic scales catching the light and refracting it in 1,000 directions. Its powerful limbs, adapted from various apex predators across known space, twitched as though responding to a primal dream of the hunt. The biosteel skin, capable of adapting to almost any environment, rippled with contained power. What about its intelligence? Varn asked, pressing his palm against the chamber, feeling the coolness against his skin. Precisely calibrated, Morin replied. Smart enough to track, analyze, and eliminate with tactical precision. Not intelligent enough to question orders or develop independent thoughts. The perfect balance. Varn nodded approvingly. The Council will be pleased. The demonstrations of smaller prototypes have already impressed the war ministers. But this, he gestured toward the floating behemoth. This will change everything. As the two continued their discussion of deployment protocols and containment procedures, light years away on the frontier planet Viridia, a man named Elias Thorne awoke in his modest cabin, unaware that he had just become the Empire's next target. The morning light filtered through the canopy of ancient trees, casting dappled patterns across the wooden floor of Thorne's dwelling. At 53, Elias moved with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to living in harmony with his surroundings. His weathered hands, marked with the scars of a lifetime spent working with both delicate scientific instruments and rough wilderness tools, reached for the kettle that hung over the small fireplace. Outside, Viridia's primeval forest stretched in every direction, a vast ocean of green that had become his sanctuary after departing the Empire's service over a decade ago. Here, among the towering trees and rich undergrowth, he had found peace after years of dismantling biological weapons for the Arconian decoding unit. As Elias stepped onto his porch, cup of steaming herbal tea in hand, he inhaled deeply, savoring the morning air laden with the scent of damp earth and fragrant pine. Birds called to one another in complex patterns, their songs a natural symphony that never failed to bring him contentment. Little did he know that in the antiseptic meeting rooms of the Arconian High Command, his name had just been mentioned for the first time in years. "Elias Thorne!" announced Admiral Kren, projecting a three-dimensional image of the man above the obsidian conference table. Former specialist in biological countermeasures. Left Imperial service 11 years ago, citing ethical disagreements with our bioweapon policies. The gathered officers and officials studied the hologram with varying degrees of interest. "And why?" asked Counselor Varix, her tone suggesting boredom. "Are we concerning ourselves with a single deserter hiding in the wilderness?" Admiral Kren's expression remained impassive. "Because, Counselor, this deserter has positioned himself in a region of strategic importance. The northeastern quadrant of Viridia contains one of the richest deposits of quantum crystals we've discovered. Our surveyors indicate that Thorn's settlement sits directly on our planned extraction route." "Have we attempted negotiation?" asked another counselor. "3 times," replied Kren. "He refuses relocation. Claims the forest would be irreparably damaged by our mining operations." Colonel Varn, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "One man against the Empire? This seems trivial." "One man who knows our bioweapon protocols inside and out," corrected Admiral Kren. "One man whose continued defiance sends a dangerous message to other frontier settlements. And one man whose elimination would provide an excellent field test for your new project. Colonel." A tense silence fell over the room before Varn spoke again, this time with a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're suggesting we deploy Leviathan against a single target? A former Imperial scientist?" "I'm suggesting," replied Kren, "that we demonstrate what happens to those who stand in the Empire's way, even if they stand alone." Dr. Morin, who had been invited to the meeting as a scientific advisor, frowned slightly. "Counselors, Leviathan was designed for military engagements against multiple hostiles. Using it to eliminate a single civilian might be—" "Precisely what we need," interrupted Counselor Varix, suddenly animated. "If this new weapon can eliminate a former weapons specialist, someone who understands our technology and tactics, then its effectiveness against ordinary resistance will be beyond question." The vote was quick and nearly unanimous. Only Dr. Morin hesitated before adding her approval. Thus, the fate of Elias Thorn was sealed with the casual indifference that had become the Empire's hallmark. 3 days later, the deployment order was issued. Leviathan's transportation pod entered Viridia's atmosphere like a shooting star, trailing plasma as it descended toward the northeastern forest quadrant. Inside the reinforced chamber, the creature remained in a semi-dormant state, neural inhibitors keeping its predatory instincts in check until touchdown. Dr. Morin supervised the final pre-deployment checks from the orbital command ship. Her fingers danced across the console, fine-tuning parameters and ensuring the biometric target lock was functioning properly. "Target data uploaded," she confirmed. "Leviathan will recognize Elias Thorn from genetic markers, pheromone signature, and physical characteristics." Colonel Varn stood behind her, arms crossed. "What's the elimination protocol?" Maureen's eyes remained fixed on the screen. "Clean and efficient. Once Leviathan confirms target identity, termination will be swift. No unnecessary suffering." "That's more mercy than traitors deserve," Varn muttered. Morin turned slightly. "This isn't about mercy, Colonel. It's about efficiency. Leviathan is programmed to eliminate threats, not to torture or terrorize." The transport pod impacted with a thunderous crash, embedding itself in the forest floor. Birds scattered in alarm, their panicked calls echoing through the canopy as a plume of disturbed earth and smoke rose above the trees. 50 kilometers away, Elias paused in his garden work, looking up at the distant sound. His eyes narrowed. In his years on Viridia, he had grown attuned to the planet's rhythms and sounds. That was no natural occurrence. Something had entered the atmosphere and impacted nearby. With practiced movements, he secured his cabin and gathered basic supplies, including an old pulse rifle he rarely used. Years of Imperial service had taught him caution, and the sound he'd heard warranted investigation. As the forest gradually quieted around the impact site, the transport pod's exterior shell cracked open like an enormous metal egg. Sterile mist hissed outward, momentarily obscuring the emerging form of Leviathan. As the fog dissipated, the creature rose to its full height, towering above the surrounding vegetation. Sunlight gleamed off its metallic scales as sensors in its elongated skull began sampling the environment, analyzing air composition, temperature gradients, and biological signatures. Its movements were fluid and precise, showing none of the jerky uncertainty of previous generations of bioengineered weapons. This was a predator in its element, designed with one purpose: to hunt. Leviathan's neural processors began filtering the vast stream of sensory data, isolating fragments that matched its programmed target: a faint trace of human perspiration on a leaf, microscopic skin cells carried by the wind, the distant scent of wood smoke. Each data point represented a breadcrumb in the trail that would lead to Elias Thorne. With a slight adjustment of its posture, the creature oriented itself toward the northeast and began to move. Its massive form navigated between trees with surprising grace, each step calculated to minimize noise and disturbance. The hunt had begun. Elias reached the edge of a small clearing and dropped to one knee, studying the ground. Years as a tracker had taught him to read the forest floor like a book, and what he saw troubled him. Something large had passed through recently, something that moved with purpose and intelligence. The pattern of disturbed vegetation suggested a biped, but the depth of the impressions indicated a mass far beyond human scale. "Imperial," he muttered to himself, recognizing the methodical pattern of movement. Not a random animal, but something with tactical training or programming. He rose and continued his cautious approach toward the impact site, moving with the silent efficiency that had once made him valuable to the Empire and now kept him alive in the wilderness. As he traveled, he scattered small sensor nodes, devices of his own design that monitored biological and chemical signatures throughout his territory. It was these sensors that first alerted him to the true nature of the intruder. One by one, the nodes began transmitting anomalous readings to his risk communicator, genetic markers that matched no known species, combined with synthetic compounds that bore the unmistakable signature of Imperial bioengineering. Elias stopped in his tracks, cold realization washing over him. The Empire had sent a biological weapon, not soldiers or negotiators, but one of their living weapons, the very kind he had once helped to neutralize. His mind raced. Why would they deploy such an asset against a single man? The resources required, the risk of exposure. It made no strategic sense unless they were using him as a test subject, a demonstration. With new urgency, he altered his course, heading not toward the impact site but back toward his cabin. If he was being hunted by an Imperial bioweapon, he would need specific countermeasures, equipment, and compounds he had hoped never to use again. Meanwhile, Leviathan continued its methodical advance, its sensory array constantly adjusting to the rich biological tapestry of Viridia's forest. The creature passed a small stream, pausing momentarily as its systems detected a concentrated cluster of human biochemical traces. The target had spent significant time here, perhaps collecting water or bathing. Leviathan's neural processors calculated that the traces were approximately 48 hours old. It was on the right track. As it moved to continue the pursuit, something unexpected occurred. The ambient sounds of the forest, the constant symphony of insects, birds, and rustling leaves, abruptly ceased. A preternatural silence fell, as though the ecosystem itself had collectively held its breath. Leviathan's advanced senses detected no immediate threat, yet something had triggered a mass response from the local wildlife. The creature paused, its adaptive skin shifting colors to match the surrounding foliage as it processed this anomaly. In the orbital command ship, Dr. Morin frowned at her display. Colonel, we're seeing some unusual patterns in Leviathan's telemetry. Varn moved to her side. Explain. It's hesitating. The neural activity suggests it's encountered something unexpected. Her fingers tapped through several screens of data. Ambient wildlife reactions don't match predicted patterns for the environment. Could it be a defense system? Something Thorn set up? Morin shook her head. If it were a conventional threat, Leviathan would have identified and responded to it. This is different. It's almost as if the entire ecosystem is reacting to Leviathan's presence in a coordinated way. On the ground, Leviathan resumed its advance, though with noticeably increased caution. Its powerful limbs carried it deeper into the forest, following the strengthening trail of human biochemical signatures. The silence continued, broken only by the creature's measured footfalls and the occasional distant call of some unseen animal. Then, as it approached a dense thicket, Leviathan detected a new scent, something that triggered an unexpected response in its carefully engineered neural pathways. The scent was faint but distinct, a complex chemical compound that matched nothing in its extensive database. As the creature's sensory apparatus analyzed the substance, its neural network began generating warning signals. The compound bore structural similarities to known bioweapon neutralizing agents, specifically, those designed to disrupt the very type of engineered biology that comprised Leviathan itself. For the first time since its activation, Leviathan experienced what could only be described as uncertainty. Its programming urged continued pursuit of the target. Yet fundamental self-preservation protocols were now detecting potential threats in the environment. The creature paused again, its massive form becoming unnaturally still as competing directives cascaded through its neural processors. In his cabin, Elias worked with practiced efficiency, preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. From a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, he retrieved a sealed case containing equipment from his former life, specialized tools and compounds developed to counteract Imperial bioweapons. As he assembled a small device designed to emit targeted electromagnetic pulses that could disrupt synthetic neural networks, his mind was already several steps ahead, formulating a strategy. He had no illusions about outfighting whatever the Empire had sent. His only chance lay in exploiting potential weaknesses in its design. What Elias didn't realize was that his greatest defense was already active, had been active for years. In fact, during his decade on Viridia, his work with neutralizing compounds had gradually permeated the soil and vegetation around his settlement. The forest itself had become saturated with trace elements that could interfere with bioengineered organisms. This invisible shield, created inadvertently through years of careful environmental stewardship, was now causing Leviathan's first experience with something approaching doubt. In the command ship, alarms began to sound as Leviathan's vital signs showed increasing anomalies. "What's happening?" demanded Varn, watching as indicators shifted from green to amber across the display. Dr. Morin's hands flew across the controls, her expression tense. "It's detecting something in the environment, some kind of chemical signature that's triggering its self-preservation protocols." "Override them," Varn ordered. "The mission takes priority." "It's not that simple," Morin replied, frustration evident in her voice. "These aren't conscious decisions we can simply countermand. They're fundamental responses built into its biology. If Leviathan perceives a threat to its cellular integrity, the preservation response happens at a level below conscious control." She pulled up new screens of data, her eyes widening slightly. "Colonel, I'm detecting trace elements of compound XR27 in the environmental readings Leviathan is transmitting." "And what exactly is XR27? "A specialized neutralizing agent developed for our early generation bioweapons. It works by disrupting the synthetic neural pathways that allow control over enhanced biological functions." She looked up at Varn, realization dawning. It was Thorn's specialty when he worked for the decoding unit. Varn's expression darkened. Are you telling me this deserter has somehow weaponized the entire forest against us? Not weaponized, exactly, Morin corrected. But over years of living there, working with these compounds, he may have inadvertently created an environment that's hostile to our bioengineered systems. Leviathan, meanwhile, had resumed its advance, though its movements now showed a caution that bordered on reluctance. The biochemical trail of its target was growing stronger, indicating that the human dwelling was near. Yet, with each step, the concentration of the unknown compound also increased. The creature's sophisticated neural network calculated permutations and risks, constantly reassessing the mission parameters against the growing environmental threat. For a weapon designed with absolute certainty as its operational baseline, this emerging ambiguity represented an unprecedented challenge. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the forest canopy, Elias completed his preparations. He had distributed specialized sensors throughout the approach to his cabin, creating a network that would alert him to the creature's advance. What these sensors now told him was both confusing and potentially advantageous. The bioweapon was hesitating, its approach slowing with proximity. Something in the environment was affecting it, likely the accumulated neutralizing agents he had worked with over the years. This unexpected development offered a slim chance, one that Elias knew he would need to capitalize on quickly. With grim determination, he stepped out of his cabin and into the gathering dusk, carrying only a small pack and the electromagnetic disruptor. His plan was dangerous, perhaps suicidally so, but it represented his best chance of survival. Rather than waiting for the creature to reach his cabin, he would meet it on ground of his choosing, a small clearing where the concentration of neutralizing compounds was highest, a place where the bioweapon's uncertainty might be maximized. As Elias moved silently through the familiar forest, his mind remained focused on the task ahead. He harbored no illusions about the Empire's intentions or his chances of survival. They had sent their weapon not merely to remove an obstacle, but to make a statement, to demonstrate that no one, not even a former Imperial specialist, could defy their will without consequences. What they hadn't counted on was that Elias had spent his entire career understanding and countering exactly this type of threat. If anyone could survive an encounter with an Imperial bioweapon, it was the man who had once dismantled them for a living. Leviathan detected the change in its target's movement pattern immediately. The human was no longer at the fixed location but was moving, not away from the threat, as logic would dictate, but toward it. This unexpected behavior triggered new analytical processes as the creature attempted to understand this apparent contradiction. Was the target unaware of the pursuit? No. The movement patterns suggested purpose and direction. A trap, perhaps. Leviathan's sensors detected no conventional weapons or explosives in the vicinity. What, then, explained this irrational approach? As these calculations occupied its neural processors, Leviathan continued to advance, though with increasing difficulty. The unknown compound was now present in concentrations high enough to cause noticeable effects on its synthetic biology. Movement required greater effort. Sensory inputs became less reliable. Decision matrices that had once produced instant, definitive responses now generated probabilities rather than certainties. For the first time in its brief existence, Leviathan was experiencing something like internal conflict. In the orbital command center, the mood had shifted from confident anticipation to growing concern. Dr. Morin's expression was grim as she analyzed the deteriorating telemetry from Leviathan. "Its systems are showing significant stress," she reported. "The neutralizing agent is affecting neural transmission efficiency. If this continues, we could lose control entirely." Colonel Varn paced behind her, his earlier smugness replaced by barely contained frustration. "Can you compensate? Boost the control signal?" "I'm trying," Morin replied, her fingers dancing across the interface. But this isn't just about signal strength. The compound is affecting Leviathan at a cellular level, disrupting the fundamental mechanisms that make it function as designed. A junior officer approached with a data tablet. "Doctor, we've recovered additional information about Thorne's work with the decoding unit. According to these records, he specialized in creating environmental countermeasures, systems that could neutralize bioweapons without conventional combat." Morin took the tablet, scanning its contents quickly. "That explains it. He's been preparing for this, perhaps not specifically, but his entire approach to living on Viridia has created a natural defense system." "Preparing?" Varn's voice rose. "You mean to tell me this deserter has been anticipating an Imperial response for years?" "Not necessarily consciously," Moran clarified. "But his expertise in neutralizing compounds, combined with his environmental practices, he's essentially been inoculating his surroundings against exactly the type of weapon we've sent." The implications hung in the air, unspoken but clear. They had drastically underestimated their target. As dusk deepened into twilight, Elias reached the clearing he had selected for the confrontation. Ancient trees surrounded the small open space, their massive trunks and spreading canopies creating a natural amphitheater. The ground here was covered with a carpet of moss and low-growing plants that Elias knew contained the highest concentration of neutralizing compounds in his territory. He moved to the center of the clearing and waited, his senses attuned to the forest around him. The usual evening chorus of insects and nocturnal birds was absent, replaced by an unnatural silence that told him the creature was near. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Elias remained motionless, controlling his breathing, focusing his mind. In his years with the decoding unit, he had learned that panic was as deadly as any weapon. Clear thinking, the ability to observe, analyze, and adapt, had saved his life countless times. Then, at the edge of the clearing, a shadow moved. Not the natural shifting of leaves or the passage of forest creatures, but something deliberate and massive. Elias turned slowly to face it, his hand resting on the electromagnetic disruptor, but not activating it yet. First, he needed to assess what exactly he was facing. The creature that emerged from the tree line was unlike anything Elias had encountered, even in his years working with Imperial bioweapons. Standing over 3 meters tall, with a frame that combined the predatory efficiency of multiple apex species, it moved with a fluid grace that belied its enormous size. Its skin, if the metallic, scale-like covering could be called skin, shifted colors subtly, adapting to its surroundings, even as it moved. But what struck Elias most was not the creature's imposing physical presence, but the hesitation in its movements. This was not the relentless advance of a perfect predator. There was caution there, perhaps even reluctance. As Leviathan entered the clearing, its sensory systems immediately registered the spike in neutralizing compounds. Warning signals cascaded through its neural network, urging retreat from the potential threat to its biological integrity. Yet the primary directive, eliminate the target, remained active, creating a conflict that manifested as physical hesitation. The creature stopped several meters from Elias, its enormous form unnaturally still. Advanced optical sensors studied the human, confirming identity match with the mission parameters. Target acquired, elimination authorized. Yet it did not advance. In the silence of the clearing, human and bioweapon regarded each other, a tableau frozen in the gathering darkness. Elias spoke then, his voice calm and measured. "You were created to kill, but this forest wasn't made for killing. I respect life. You have the right to preserve yours." The words, of course, meant nothing to Leviathan in a literal sense. Its programming included no provisions for communication or negotiation. And yet, something in the calm, steady cadence of the human's voice registered in its sensory array, not as language, but as a pattern distinct from threat or aggression. For several long moments, The standoff continued. Leviathan's neural processors calculated countless permutations, trying to resolve the fundamental conflict between its primary directive and the environmental threat that now registered as severe. Advance would likely result in increased exposure to the neutralizing compound, potentially causing irreversible damage to its synthetic biology. Retreat would constitute mission failure. In the command center, alarms blared as Leviathan's telemetry showed critical system stress. "It's not attacking," Varn observed, incredulous. "Why isn't it attacking?" Dr. Morin stared at the readings, her scientific detachment momentarily giving way to wonder. "The neutralizing agent is reaching critical concentrations. Leviathan's self-preservation protocols are overriding the mission parameters." "That's impossible," Varn insisted. "You assured me its programming was absolute. The mission takes priority over everything." "In theory, yes," Morin replied, her eyes never leaving the display. "But we're seeing something unprecedented here. The threat to its biological integrity is so severe that the foundational survival instincts are asserting themselves over the program directives." A junior scientist approached with new data. "Doctor, the readings suggest the entire clearing is saturated with the neutralizing compound. If Leviathan advances further, we could see catastrophic neural degradation." Morin made a decision. "Send the abort signal. Recall Leviathan immediately." "Absolutely not," Varn countered, his voice hard. "The mission proceeds." "Colonel, if we don't recall it now, we may lose the asset entirely. The compound is already affecting its neural functions. Much more exposure could render it permanently damaged, or worse." Their argument was rendered moot by what happened next. In the clearing, Leviathan made its choice. With a fluid motion that seemed almost deliberate in its slowness, the creature turned away from Elias. Its massive form began to recede toward the tree line, moving with the same careful precision it had shown in its advance. Elias remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. He had anticipated many possible outcomes to this confrontation, had prepared for combat, for injury, for the possibility of his own death. What he had not expected was retreat. As Leviathan disappeared into the darkening forest, Elias finally allowed himself to exhale, the tension of the moment giving way to a complicated mixture of relief and disbelief. The Empire's ultimate predator, designed specifically for killing, had chosen self-preservation over its mission. In the command center, stunned silence greeted the telemetry, showing Leviathan's retreat. "It's withdrawing," Morin stated, her professional composure barely masking her astonishment. "Without the abort command, it's making its own decision." Varn's face was a mask of barely contained fury. "This is a catastrophic failure. Your creation has malfunctioned at the most critical moment." "Not a malfunction," Morin corrected, her scientific curiosity overriding her awareness of Varn's anger. "An adaptation. When faced with an existential threat to its biology, Leviathan prioritized survival over its programmed objective." "That's not a failure of design. It's an emergence of something we didn't anticipate." "Something you should have anticipated," Varn snapped. "The Empire doesn't create weapons that retreat." Morin turned to face him fully. "The Empire created a biological entity with enhanced capabilities and specific programming. But at its core, it remains biological, subject to the most fundamental imperative of all living things: survival." The implications of what had occurred would take time to fully process. But one thing was immediately clear: the mission had failed. The Empire's perfect predator had encountered something it wasn't designed to overcome. Not a superior force or a cleverer opponent, but an environment that rejected its very nature. In the days that followed, Elias remained vigilant, expecting that the Empire might send conventional forces to complete what their bioweapon could not. Yet no ships appeared in Viridia's skies. No soldiers emerged from the forest. The silence was both a relief and a puzzle. Unknown to him, a heated debate was unfolding in the highest levels of Imperial command. The unexpected failure of Leviathan had prompted a re-evaluation of the Empire's bioweapon strategy. If their most advanced creation could be thwarted by environmental countermeasures, what did that mean for their broader military doctrine? Dr. Morin found herself simultaneously defending her creation and advocating for a new approach. Leviathan performed exactly as its biology dictated, she argued in a closed council session. What we witnessed wasn't a design flaw, but a glimpse of something more profound: the limits of control when working with living systems. Her findings, documented in a report that would later be classified at the highest level, included this observation: a day will come when bioweapons must include self-preservation consciousness or fail. The Thorn incident demonstrates that even perfect engineering cannot overcome the fundamental imperatives of biology when faced with targeted countermeasures. Colonel Varn, humbled by the failure but unwilling to abandon the project entirely, shifted his focus to non-biological weapon systems, areas where human ingenuity could create destruction without the unpredictable variables of living organisms. And on Viridia, Elias Thorn returned to his quiet life among the ancient trees. He reinforced his cabin's defenses and expanded his network of environmental sensors, but otherwise resumed the peaceful routine that had sustained him for years. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the significance of what had occurred. Not a victory in any conventional sense. He had neither destroyed the Empire's weapon nor driven away its creators, but a demonstration of a deeper truth: that life, even engineered life, contains complexities and imperatives that transcend programming. As he tended his garden in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the forest canopy, Elias reflected on the silent conversation that had passed between him and the creature in that twilight clearing. No words had been exchanged. No understanding reached in any human sense. And yet, something fundamental had been communicated. A recognition, perhaps, that survival sometimes means choosing not to kill. The forest of Viridia continued its ancient cycles, indifferent to the brief drama that had played out beneath its towering canopy. Birds returned to their songs, insects to their nightly chorus. To a casual observer, nothing would have appeared changed. But something had changed. In the sterile laboratories of the Empire, scientists pored over data from the failed mission, questioning assumptions that had guided their work for generations. In the command centers of the Imperial fleet, strategists re-evaluated doctrines that had seemed unassailable. And in a quiet clearing on a frontier world, where a perfect predator had turned away from its prey, a new understanding had taken root, one that suggested even the most carefully engineered weapon could not escape the fundamental imperatives of life itself. The Empire would, of course, return someday. Elias harbored no illusions about that. Resources as valuable as Viridia's quantum crystals would not be abandoned over a single setback. But when they came again, they would come differently. Perhaps with conventional forces. Perhaps with new weapons not subject to the biological imperatives that had saved his life. Until then, he would continue his quiet existence, tending his garden, studying the forest, and maintaining the environmental safeguards that had proven so unexpectedly effective. The knowledge he had once used to dismantle the Empire's weapons had now become his shield, a fitting transformation for a man who had exchanged the sterile confines of Imperial laboratories for the living complexity of Viridia's ancient forest. As twilight fell once more over his small cabin, Elias stepped onto the porch and gazed at the darkening trees. Somewhere out there, the Empire's perfect predator was returning to its makers, carrying with it data that would change their understanding of what was possible. And here, in this small clearing carved from the primeval forest, a single human continued his vigil, not as a warrior or a rebel, but as a caretaker of knowledge that had proven more powerful than the Empire's most advanced weapon. The forest whispered its ancient secrets as darkness descended. Elias Thorne listened and understood.